Hey guys, MetalJesus here, and today I'm back with part 2 of me sharing with you some of my big box PC game collection. Now you guys loved the first video, it was a lot of fun to make, but the biggest piece of feedback I got is that you like seeing the boxes, but you would love to see the gameplay footage too. Well, in this video I'm going to do my best to try to include gameplay footage for most of the games I show in this. It should be really cool. We've got 2 more shelves to go through, so let's take a look. So we're going to get started here with the original Tomb Raider games, and I have, I believe, the first 5 of them here. So you have the original Tomb Raider. Now notice that it is in a trapezoid box, and this was something that Eidos did when Tomb Raider came out, I guess to probably make it stand out on shelves. This is something that was very common in the PC gaming market at the time. There was no standard of box sizes or even shapes, and this is something that Eidos did for several years. And I remember getting the first Tomb Raider. I played it on PC originally just in software mode, but then I got a rendition 3D accelerated card, and this game blew me away. I love the original Tomb Raider. And then you have Tomb Raider Gold here, which is basically the original game with 4 additional levels. Tomb Raider 2 is kind of where I played Tomb Raider 2 to the end and I enjoyed it, but this is at the point where I was starting to get a little bit burned out on the series. But it continues on in Tomb Raider 3, as well as Tomb Raider The Last Revelation. Tomb Raider Chronicles, I never touched that game. I think at this point, even the developers were probably getting burned out on creating Tomb Raider games. But I have these in my collection because I like the trapezoid box style. And it was so cool that Eidos did this at the time, and they had a bunch of them. And even Legacy of Kane Soul Reaver came out on a beautiful trapezoid box. Now I think most people probably played, you know, Legacy of Kane Soul Reaver on the PlayStation, but you know, they also put it out on PC, which is cool. Continuing on over here, you have more trapezoid boxes, including Joint Strike Fighter. This was an unusual release for Eidos at the time. It's a flight sim game that focuses really on stealth. Now I have an entire section of my game room dedicated just to flight sims. It's actually in the other room there. And normally I would put this game over there because that's actually where it belongs, but because it's an Eidos game and because it's a trapezoid, I have it over here. Just one of those silly things I do in my collection. Moving on, you have 2 masterpiece games. I love these games so much. You have Thief 1 and 2. Oh man, you know, I know I say it all the time, but I really, really like stealth games. And the reason why I like stealth games is because of the original Thief and the second game. They are just everything I love about their first person. They're, would you say medieval, Victorian, something like that? But basically, you know, I like the era that this exists in. It fits into that stealth gameplay really well. These are very smart games. I like how there's a little bit of fantasy in it as well. There's a little bit of the supernatural. I played those 2 games so much. Moving on here, we have I always say this wrong. Revenant. Wasn't there a movie called Revenant, right? I think so. So this is a game that came out, and I don't think it was necessarily that popular at the time. It's considered to be basically, you know, a Diablo clone. And there were a lot of these type of Diablo clones at the time, because, you know, once there's a big success like that, a lot of developers, a lot of publishers try to do that as well. And this was a game that came out that I don't know if a lot of people loved it or not, but the next game is pretty interesting. That is Omicron, the Nomad Soul. Now, this also came out on the Dreamcast, but the PC version is the one that I dove into initially. And it's a trippy game. It's by Aquatic Dream, which made Detroit More Than Human. And this is a really wild game. It's basically kind of like a third-person, open-world, futuristic game. It deals with the city that has a protective dome over it. And essentially what you do in this game is you can possess or take control of other characters to try to solve mysteries or puzzles, things like that. Another thing that's kind of interesting about this game is that it has multiple play styles. So for instance, if I remember it right, it actually has like first-person shooting elements to it, and then it has fighting elements to it, like third-person, fighting mechanics. So plus it's got an original soundtrack by David Bowie, which at the time you see here, if you open up this flap, you see David Bowie right there. That was a pretty cool little feature of it. So definitely kind of an unusual game. Next to that, you have another game that's a little bit unusual. It's called Urban Chaos. And if I remember right, this also came out, I think on the PlayStation 2, I forget. But anyways, this is another game where it's a third-person action game, but it takes place in an urban environment, and so it kind of feels almost like Grand Theft Auto a little bit. So kind of a cool game. Again, I don't know if it did very well, but it's a trapezoid game, so I had to have it in my collection. Here's another game that I don't think did very well either. That is Conquest Earth. And I believe I got this actually out of a trade that I did, that big, massive trade that I did a couple years ago. I haven't played this. It looks like kind of like a Warcraft clone. So I remember seeing it advertised in magazines, but I haven't played it. If you've played it, let me know. And then here's an unusual one. When I show people this, they're surprised to see this. So it's Final Fantasy VII on the PC. And again, published by Eidos and developed by Squaresoft. So I believe Eidos brought it to the PC. This is the version that I played. When this game came out, this is actually my original copy that I played back in the day. And yeah, I just really loved this game at the time. The pre-render backgrounds, plus it also had, the polygon characters looked really sharp in this game, sharper than they did on the original PlayStation for sure. So, bit of an unusual release in the Final Fantasy series. Next to that, we have one of the classic computer RPGs of all time. That is the Might and Magic series. And, Might and Magic was a series that came out that I played a lot, especially the third game. So I have the third game right here. When this game first came out, the Isles of Terra, I just thought this was one of the most beautiful games I'd ever seen. I still, to this day, when I look at the gameplay footage of this, it just takes me back to that time when I was playing this game. It's definitely, there's a lot of games that are kind of similar to this where they are those first-person dungeon crawlers. And, this was one of the more popular in that franchise. I think most people played Eye of the Beholder. That's certainly one that people played at the time. But, yeah, Might and Magic 3 was definitely one of my favorites. And then another one in those, or another two of them that really stood out at the time that were pretty cool. They had these big, speaking of big boxes right here, you have Might and Magic, The Clouds of Xeen, and then you have Dark Side of Xeen. And basically the way that this works is that these two games go together. And essentially what happens is that if you install both of them on the hard drive, then you have access to both of the games at the same time, which is pretty crazy because these games are usually pretty big anyways. And so here is the selling point that, you get even more, right? It'd be almost like if you bought all the Elder Scrolls games, and then if you had them all on the hard drive, every single area would just be opened up to you. I mean, it's just completely excessive, but also really, really awesome that they did that. I just love these big boxes, the artwork. Yeah, Might and Magic has a very special place in my heart. Now, it's funny because I'm looking at this, and I used to have, and I'm surprised I don't, they used to have Heroes of Might and Magic. I played Heroes of Might and Magic 2, I believe. Gosh, so much. So that's what I'm gonna have to get for the collection. But as for the main games, these are the ones in there. I didn't really play much beyond Clouds of Xeen and also Dark Side of Xeen. But I've heard that the newer ones are a little bit hit and miss. I don't know. You let me know down in the comments if I should check them out. All right, moving on. We've got a random group of games here, starting with Terra Nova, Strikeforce, Centauri. First of all, look at that cover. That cover is amazing. Like so many other great big box PC games. So this game to me, boy, you know, it's funny because when you look at this now, when you look at the gameplay footage now, this game looks really rough. But back in the day, it was a technical marvel because essentially the big selling point for this game at the time was that all of the graphics were textured. And at the time, that was a very hardware expensive thing to do. Like, you know, especially in software. And so I believe this might have been doing voxels or something like that. But basically, you know, you are playing a mechanized power suit and shooting and all that sort of stuff. But again, the graphics at the time were the big selling point on this. It looked impressive. Today, not so much. But yeah, the other thing that was pretty cool about this too is that it had full motion video. Again, another kind of novelty at the time where, ooh, they've got real actors, you know, pretending to be in the game. That was all the rage at the time. So I have very fond memories of playing Terra Nova at the time. Moving on, we have another game that a lot of people have fond memories of. That is Nocturne. Nocturne is it's one of these games where if you played this, you remember this game because it was so unusual, and I don't think it got ported to anything else other than the PC. But yeah, so this is a game. This is an action survival horror game. Takes place in the Great Depression, I believe in the 20s or the 30s, and you work for a secret government organization that is trying to investigate these supernatural occurrences. And just a really memorable, cool game. It's one that I think is ripe for getting an HD remaster or a remake or of some kind like that. So yeah, just one of those kind of like hidden gems, but yet if you played it, you definitely loved it. And next to that are two more games that I remember fondly. So you have Crusader, No Remorse, and No Regret. And the funny thing about these games is that if you show these to anybody, they go, wow, that looks just like Boba Fett. And they're right. I mean, it totally does. It's very funny, although these are not Star Wars games at all. Basically, they are isometric shooting action games that at the time were pretty unusual because you might see games like that on consoles, at least at the time, but not so much on PCs. And these were just beautiful, really great looking games. Now, the downside to them, unfortunately, was that the controls were very clunky. If I'm trying to remember right, you use the mouse to shoot or something, or to aim, and then platforming was not great. You kind of had to line up to platform, but you know, I didn't care. I was all in on these games. I thought they were so cool. These were games by Origin, and Origin just made some amazing games on the PC, and these are two really cool ones. Next to that is a racing game that I still play today, and that is Revolt. Revolt is an RC, remote control racing game. Mostly I play this actually on the Dreamcast because the Dreamcast got a really great port of it. I believe it also came out on the N64, but it was the PC version I played first, and I still think this is a fantastic game. I love the scale, how you're shrunk down, you know, to a remote control in an RC car. It's really cool. The levels are really, really interesting. They're all kind of real world. You're in a neighborhood, you're in a supermarket, stuff like that. Really tight controls. This is a fantastic version on the PC. Next up is a survival horror game that took me forever to get. And I wanted it pretty much for its box. That is Flesh Feast. Now this is published by Sega on the PC. So this is a pretty trippy Sega game that came out on the PC. But look at that cover. It's absolutely disgusting. It's so, and even the back is like disturbing. So basically this is a top-down survival horror game. I don't really think it's necessarily that good, but again, it's really cool because of the cover. So that's kind of why I wanted it. I know it's really dumb, but that's true. There's also a t-shirt in here that originally when I got this, it did not have, but a really cool fan of the channel sent me his. He had a t-shirt that he had in his, and so just a really trippy, disturbing Sega game. Next up is a really interesting sci-fi RPG called Anachronics. I remember when this was released, you saw ads all over the gaming magazines. There was a lot of hype for it. Now, I don't know if it necessarily did very well, which is, if that's true, that's definitely disappointing because it's such a cool RPG. It basically tries to mix Japanese style and also Western style into one massive RPG, and for the most part actually it succeeds really well. Also, this game is known for being very quirky, very funny, just lots of personable characters and dialogue, plus it's also got a really cool combat system. So just a really interesting release for, oh yeah, so Ion Storm made it, but it was published by Eidos. Huh, that's cool. So yeah, definitely a gem in my collection. Moving on, I'm gonna be curious to hear how many of you remember a game called Z. Now, back in the day, correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember when this first came out, and really it was compared big time to Warcraft 2. And in many ways, a lot of people would kind of have a little bit of a back and forth as to which one was better. Now you gotta keep in mind, this was what, 1996, I think? But at the time, Z was a pretty cool real-time strategy game, and it went up against Warcraft 2. That's obviously Warcraft 2 is way more popular, but still, I have a soft spot for this game right here. Next up is a game I'm sure many of you played on the PlayStation, that is G-Police. And this is the PC version, obviously, but I think most people played it on the PlayStation. But for me, it was all about the 3D acceleration in this game. If you don't know, this is a futuristic helicopter game that at the time was groundbreaking with its graphics. I thought it was so beautiful at the time. I just had all these light flares and all these special effects. It was a showcase for the 3D acceleration. Doesn't really hold up that much today. It would be another game that'd be pretty cool to get some sort of like, you know, HD remaster or something like that. Next up is a game that is featured a lot on my channel, and that of course is Interstate 76. This is a car combat game that takes place in an alternate future where there's a gas crisis, and you play, I believe, is the Groove Champion, who is a vigilante, and you're cruising around doing car combat. Had a really cool graphic style. Man, I just love this game so much. I bought Interstate 82, the sequel, but didn't really get into it as much for some reason. The original will always be one of my all-time favorites. Next up is a really interesting release called Shattered Steel. Now, the reason why this is kind of interesting is because it is a BioWare game. Yes, the same developer that made Baldur's Gate, as well as Mass Effect and all those games, but way back in the day, they made a mech game, which is so interesting. Now, for some reason, I have this sealed, which is really, I must have gotten this more recently, but yeah, you know, I have this in my collection because, again, it's kind of a weird BioWare release. Next up is a really interesting adventure game called Spycraft: The Great Game by Activision. Now, when this first came out, it was very different than everything else that was out at the time because it's an adventure game, but it uses full motion video and it takes place kind of in the real world. So it deals with real espionage, real spy stuff. You play as a CIA operative, and essentially they worked with real people who had knowledge of spy stuff in the US to come up with the scenarios that this game deals with. So you're trying to solve puzzles, you're trying to figure out maybe what's going on in this deeper conspiracy. It deals with assassinations. It's just all kind of doomsday, cloak and dagger stuff. Very cool game. I don't know if a lot of people remember it, but I certainly do. I thought it was a really cool game at the time. Next up is another kind of unusual Final Fantasy release. This is Final Fantasy VIII on the PC, not by Eidos, so this was released by Squaresoft. And I got this one way after it was originally released. I forget where I got this, but just kind of another unusual PC version of a game that most people, kind of equate with the original PlayStation, but really nice box, cool to have it on the PC. And speaking of adventure games, here is one that a lot of people consider to be one of the best ever made. That is The Last Express. My copy is signed by the guy who created it. So this game was 5 years in the making and cost millions of dollars. And ultimately, it failed when it was originally released, which is really sad. But basically, what you can see here is that it is a game that takes place on the Orient Express. So you're on that train, kind of like almost like an Agatha Christie novel where you're trying to solve these murders. Now, what's interesting about this game is that it is a ton of rotoscoping over real actors. And so it has a very unusual look to it, and I think that's the reason why it probably took so long, because rotoscoping back then took forever to do. The other thing about this is that I believe, if I remember right, all of the scenarios happen kind of in real time. So there's a real sense of urgency to this game to try to get through it and solve it, in the time that you have. So yeah, just a really cool piece of history here if you like adventure games. I believe this is out on GOG.com. I could be wrong about that, but I know that was originally it failed, but it was resurrected because so many people wanted to play it. All right, moving down to this shelf, we're going to start with a section where I have a bunch of Need for Speed games, including a really special one here. This is Hot Pursuit, the 2010 version, but this copy right here was only given out to EA employees during that holiday season. Actually, a viewer of my channel sent this to me who worked there, who knows that I'm a big fan of that series. And as you can see, it has a really interesting and cool slip cover right here. It says Hot Pursuit right there. EA Crew Edition 2010. You open it up and there's a nice message right there. It says Happy Holidays. You pull the disc out, or the DVD cover here, and you see that it says on the spine EA Crew Edition 2010, has its own unique cover. You open it up and the disc is not for resale. Looks like maybe an internal Gold Master version of it. And then on the back, it shows that it actually comes with 7 exclusive cars that are not in the retail version. So I thought this was really cool because that is a great Need for Speed game, and this is a pretty unusual version of that game. And then as for the Need for Speed games, I've got a bunch of my favorites in here, especially the early ones, including the original Road and Track presents the Need for Speed. This is a special edition of that. That's the very first version I ever played of that. And then I have 2 versions of the second game. That's because the second game for a long time was my favorite. And so there's the SE version of that as well. Then you have Porsche Unleashed, which I love that game. That's the one where it really focuses on the history of Porsche. And then check this out. This is called Motor City Online. Now, this was almost called a Need for Speed game, but they decided to change the name at the last minute. But essentially what it is that it is a massively multiplayer online racing game that came out and wasn't very successful. I think it was a little bit ahead of its time. When this came out, I did not have internet that would support it, and so I didn't play it when it came out. I actually got this copy years later, but I think it was ahead of its time. I think now you could do it, and people will probably be all over it. Moving on, we've got a bunch of SSI games here, and some of these I played and others I actually got during that big 600 game pickup that I did with Kinsey a couple years ago. So I'm not super familiar with all of these, but this is one I was really excited to get, primarily just for the cover. But also I like space sims, so that's Renegade Battle for Jacob's Star. Again, it's SSI. Unfortunately, this game, it's a sequel to, I believe it's called Interceptor, which I think is based on a physical board game. I hope I'm right about that. But, I like flight sims, and so this is one that I didn't play at the time, and I thought it was pretty cool, so had to pick that one up. These I did get in that pickup. So haven't played a ton of these, but we have Warwind 1 and 2, which are, I believe, real-time strategy games similar to Warcraft, or like Warcraft 2. So that's pretty cool. We also have 2 games here that take place in the same universe called World of Aiden. You have Thunderscape, which has an epic cover. Then you have Endomorph, Plague of the Darkfall. So these both, as you see here on the covers, they take place in this World of Aiden. And SSI did a lot of that, where they would have different games that take place in different worlds or different universes. And so Thunderscape is a traditional RPG and looks kind of similar to, I would say, like Ultima Underworld probably. And an Endomorph is more of a 2D action, or I don't know if they necessarily say 2D, but basically I know parts of this are 2D, but it's like an action puzzle game. Next up is a game I never thought we'd actually see. I was surprised to see it when it was announced, and that is Tron 2.0. Because back in I think 2003 when this was announced, we didn't have a sequel to the original 1980s movie. So to see a Tron video game come out so much later, like years, decades later, I was like blown away because I loved the original movie. And this is actually a pretty cool first-person shooter. So I mean, it basically uses a lot of those Tron look and feel, but throws you into the first-person mode. And it's unlike anything I've ever played. If you like the original movie, if you dig that kind of style, you definitely have to check this game out. It also came on Xbox. That's where I originally played it. But just a very unique and unusual first-person shooter. We got a couple RPGs here, including The Summoning, put out by SSI. Another classic RPG back on the computers back in the day. This is definitely an old game, but one that is much loved. And then here's another one that's newer that a lot of people really love too. That is Septerra Core, Legacy of the Creator. And I believe this box here actually might be a European box. It looks a little bit different than, I forget where I got this. But anyway, so Septerra Core is a Western-made RPG, but made to be kind of in that Japanese style, the JRP style. So all the characters and things like that have that sort of anime look to it. The premise of this game is really cool because you are on this world that has these floating continents, and so there's like layers to it, and in the center of it is a computer, and there's all these sci-fi tropes and stuff like that. Definitely a very unique game. I think you can get this on GOG.com. And then here's a game that a lot of people to this day still consider to be one of the greatest games ever made. That is Star Control 2. So this is a space exploration game where it's just a massive universe, massive galaxy to explore, but it's got combat, it's got RPG, it's got, like I said, it's just everything poured into one game. Love that cover. So yeah, this is definitely one that I think a lot of people who gamed in the late 80s and early 90s, are looking for their collections. And then another beloved first-person shooter is Kingpin. And I think we were all kind of blown away that they're actually making a remastered version of this game. Now, when Kingpin first came out, it was so violent and so adult that it kind of blew people away. It was one of those games almost like, like Grand Theft Auto, where people are like, whoa, games can be that violent or have that much swearing in it. Definitely over the top, but a really good game. Very difficult game too. This game will kick your butt. And then next up is one of my all-time favorite arcade racing games, especially from the era, that is Speed Busters. And Speed Busters is, it looks and plays like your typical arcade racing game from the time, but it used 3D acceleration. It used a 3D FX card. Looked beautiful. There is a version of this on the Dreamcast called Speed Devils, which is also very good. But I originally played Speed Busters. That's how I know it. But even today, I still go back and play this game every once in a while, just because it's fun. It's got great cars, great controls. I know all the tracks really well, so it's a classic. And then I have two games that I kind of put together, and you'll see why. It's because one of them is Stunts by Broderbund, and the other one is Stunt Driver by Spectrum Holobyte. So I played Stunts way, way more. I loved this game at the time. I played it so much. I mean, just I don't know, at the time there was definitely a movement of making these kind of stunt-like games, even though the computers could barely run them in my opinion, but they were still really fun. Plus you could create your own tracks and things like that. And then Stunt Driver, I don't know if I've ever played this game, but it looks very similar to Stunts. But it says on the cover there that it supports the ad-lib sound card, so just shows you just how old these games are. But yeah, like I said, I have a soft spot for the original Stunts. And then here's a game that was considered very technically advanced for the time. That is Realms of the Haunting. This is by Interplay. And this is basically a first-person 3D adventure / survival horror game that just really pushed the boundaries of what these games could do at the time. Had full 3D environments, which, you know, obviously look really dated today, but at the time it was really pushing the hardware. Plus it had full 640 by 480 visuals, so it had SVGA mode. Plus it also had, if I remember right, full motion video. So those are a lot of the things, you know, plus sound and voices and things like that. Just these kind of multimedia experiences, games that push those were very groundbreaking for the time and were really exciting, and this is definitely one of them. And then moving on to the last section, at least for this video, we have Return to Castle Wolfenstein. This is in a metal tin, which I believe is a little bit collectible. I'm not sure about that, but inside of here you have a little patch, which is pretty cool. You also have a little poster and manual as well as the disc, but I guess the metal tin version, again, is somewhat collectible and a little bit unique. And then check out these releases. So if you watch my videos on going to Japan, they're gonna look kind of familiar. These are a bunch of PC Windows versions, actually Windows XP specifically versions of the Ease series. And these are all sealed, and we got these in Japan. Actually, Tony did. So he bought these, you can see them right here, for 100 yen, or basically $1 a piece, sealed. So he found these, bought these, and then I think he just gave them to me just because he doesn't collect big box PC games. But you know, these are all in Japanese. I don't even know if they have English on them, but they're just so cool and unusual that they had to be part of the collection. And then here's a game that my roommate at the time played a lot. I remember him playing this quite a bit. Protostar War on the Frontier. I remember it's primarily because of this awesome cover. This publisher always had the best game covers. Although, if I remember right, we had a hard time getting this to work because it really required a lot of conventional memory, and we struggled to get it to work on this computer. But basically this game's very similar to like Star Control. That kind of game, kind of space exploration type game. And then finally, another RPG that a lot of people love, that is Nox. I actually have a poster on my wall up there of the lady right there. Nox is another one of those games that came out at the time that, I don't know if it was as successful as they'd hoped, but it was definitely a really high quality game. I think the problem with this game is that, you know, it got compared to Diablo 2. A lot of people put out Diablo-like clones. Some of them were better than others, and Nox is definitely considered to be one of the better ones that came out. Great graphics, great controls, really cool story. So just one of those games that kind of time is forgotten, although it wouldn't surprise me if it's not on GOG.com. I should probably check that. So anyways, guys, that's part 2, looking at my big box PC game collection, but there is much more to show if you guys want me to. Down here we have the Jagged Alliance series, Ultimas, Wizardry, we have some more Origin games, Psygnosis, we got Blizzard, more SSI games, Sierra. It just goes on and on and on, and that's just this room. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. As always, guys, I want to thank you for watching my channel. Thank you for subscribing, and take care.